Hello, it's Alex and welcome to Hey Little Thrifter. Today I'm going to be doing my wrap up for the Books in the Freezer Readathon. This was hosted by Stephanie at That's What She Read and Rachel at The Shades of Orange, and it ran from October 1st to 14th. There were 5 challenges and I had selected 4 books to satisfy the 5 challenges, and sadly didn't have a super successful time with it. I ended up getting through 1.5 books pretty much in the 2 weeks. I just ended up being really busy with other things and didn't have as much time to read, so I didn't get through nearly as much as I had anticipated. So onto the books that I actually read. The only book that I read and completed within those 2 weeks was Kill Creek by Scott Thomas. I read this on my Kindle, and this was to satisfy the challenge, read a horror book that has a movie adaptation. I think this actually has a TV series adaptation in the works, and then also read a book we've recommended on the podcast. So this is a haunted house story. It's about 4 different horror authors who are invited to spend the night in a supposedly haunted house, and I'd heard really great things about this, so I was excited to finally pick it up. But it didn't really live up to my expectations, unfortunately. I just thought it was okay. It definitely had its moments that I really enjoyed, but I just had quite a hard time getting into it. I didn't really find any of the characters very interesting as individuals, and I did warm up to them a little bit when they got together and I enjoyed some of their interactions, but overall, I don't know, I just wasn't really feeling them. The main character, Sam, unfortunately, I just found him quite boring, and I didn't find his backstory very interesting. It was very predictable. The female horror author of the group, T.C. Moore, was probably the most interesting of the 4, but it did again take me quite a while to kind of warm up to her, and I didn't really like the fact that she was the only one who was sexualized at any point in the story. The only other character that even has, I think, their body mentioned is one of the other horror authors, Daniel Slaughter, and he's only really talked about because of his weight. It wasn't in a sexual manner, whereas T.C. Moore is sexualized quite a few times, and it just felt kind of really out of place because there wasn't any of that content anywhere else, or really in regards to any of the other characters. So it just kind of took me out of the story a bit because it bugged me. And the premise was quite interesting. I was intrigued to see where it went, but the story just never really grabbed me. I was waiting for that moment that I would be on board with it and be like, oh okay, now I see what all the hype is about, and it just never happened. Like I said, there were moments that I did enjoy, and I did quite like the ending too, but overall maybe this just wasn't my cup of tea. I don't know, I can't really put my finger on it, but I didn't enjoy it nearly as much as I had hoped to. I ended up giving this one 3 stars. One of my favourite parts ended up actually being the premise of one of T.C. Moore's novels. I think that was mentioned fairly early on, and I was like, wow, I would read the hell out of that book, that sounds amazing. So yeah, if Scott Thomas wants to try his hand at that, I will definitely give that one a try. Next up, I read The Hunger by Alma Katsu. This was very kindly sent to me by Putnam, and this one fulfilled the challenge for read a horror book by a female author. This is a horror retelling of The Donner Party, and I really liked this one. I only got about halfway through during the readathon itself, but I finished it off in the next few days. I really enjoyed her writing. It is quite beautiful at times and it's very compelling. It's set in 1846 and it's very much historical fiction, which isn't normally something I gravitate towards, but it had enough of the horror element to keep me interested. The story does get creepy, and I really liked how that part of the story unfolded, and it did get me a little teary-eyed towards the end, I'll be honest. We're following various different characters of different ages from different families all on this journey, and I really liked how we got to see the story from so many different perspectives, and we got to learn a bit more about them as people and their backstories. My only real negative was that some of the more minor characters got a bit lost in the shuffle because we didn't have as much of the story devoted to them. It was a bit harder for me to remember who they were. So when they came back later in the story, I was like, who was that again? But other than that, the characters that we do learn more about were really well detailed, and I just really enjoyed hearing more about them and their story, how they came to be here, and it was really interesting to see all of the different dynamics between all of these people and these families, and as the journey goes on and they're at the mercy of the landscape and the weather and how easy it is to turn on each other. We're also dealing with a time when men were definitely the ones in charge, and it was really great to see some really strong and interesting women characters within that. So it's hard to say too much more about the story itself without giving things away, but I highly recommend this one. I ended up giving it 4 stars. I also read a bit of October Dreams. This was for the challenge to read a short story collection or anthology, and this one I've got about almost a third of the way into, but even then I didn't read all of that during the readathon. I had started this towards the end of September, and I'm really enjoying it so far. I kind of put it down while I was reading some other novels, but I just picked it back up last night and read another short story. It's definitely getting me into the Halloween mood, as if I needed any help in that department. And yeah, it's just a great collection so far, so definitely want to continue with this one. And sadly, I didn't get time to even start the last book on my TBR. This is The Between by Tananarive Due, and this was for the challenge to read a book by or about a person of colour or LGBTQIA+. And I do still really want to read this one, so I'm hoping to pick this one up really soon and at least get this one read by the end of the month. I am looking forward to it. So that was everything I read for the Books in the Freezer readathon. While it wasn't super successful for me, it was still a great readathon, and thank you again to Stephanie and Rachel for hosting it. I do hope this becomes an annual thing, and I definitely will be taking part next year if that's the case. I hope you had a successful readathon if you also took part. Let me know how you got on. Thank you ever so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully I will see you again in my next video. Bye!